Lesson 1. What is biology? What is biology? The straightforward definition of biology is that it is the study of life. Regardless, the scope and reach of the subject of biology is very wide. People who study biology are called biologists, who study the subject and its many subcategories such as microbiology or marine biology. If we define biology as the science that studies life, then we need to also define what exactly life is. It may seem redundant based on our basic knowledge about what we think life could be, but in biology we need to be stricter with how we define life. It's not always easy to define life. For example, a branch of biology exists called virology. Virology studies viruses, which exhibit some of the characteristics of living organisms, but also lack some others. Viruses can attack living organisms, cause diseases, and even reproduce. However, they still do not meet the criteria that biologists use to define life. Virologists are not biologists, but some biologists study the early molecular evolution that gave rise to life. Since the events that preceded life are not biological events, these scientists are also excluded from biology in the strict sense of the term. From its humble beginnings, biology has always wrestled with three questions. What are the shared characteristics that make something alive? Once we know something is alive, how do we find the important levels of organization in its structure? Finally, when faced with the vast diversity of life, how do we organize these different kinds of organisms so that we can better understand them? Scientists discover new organisms every day, so biologists will always continue to seek answers to these and other questions. All living organisms share several key characteristics or functions: order, environmental response, reproduction, adaptation, growth and development, regulation or homeostasis, energy processing, and finally, evolution. When viewed together, these 8 characteristics serve to define life. Organisms are highly organized, coordinated structures that consist of one or more cells. Even very simple, single-celled organisms are extremely complex because inside each cell there exists atoms that form molecules. These in turn form cell organelles and other cellular inclusions. In multicellular organisms, similar cells form tissues. Tissues, in turn, collaborate to create organs which are body structures, distinct functions. Organs work together to form organ systems. For example, this cat represents a highly organized structure consisting of cells, tissues, organs, and organ systems. It is also cute, but that is not a factor in biologists' definition of life. Organisms respond to diverse environments or stimuli. For example, plants can bend toward a source of light, climb on fences and walls, or respond to touch. Even microscopic bacteria can move toward or away from chemicals or light. Movement toward a stimulus is a positive response, while movement away from a stimulus is a negative response. Reproduction is a major requirement to be considered a living organism. Single-celled organisms reproduce by first duplicating their DNA and then dividing it equally as the cell prepares to divide to form 2 new cells. Multicellular organisms often produce specialized reproductive cells, gametes and oocyte and sperm cells. After fertilization, which is the fusion of an oocyte and a sperm cell, a new individual develops. When reproduction occurs, DNA-containing genes are passed along to an organism's offspring. These genes ensure that the offspring will belong to the same species and will have similar characteristics, such as size and shape. All living organisms can adapt to their environment. Biologists refer to this as the consequence of evolution by natural selection, which operates in every lineage of reproducing organisms. Examples of adaptations are diverse and unique, from humans in the continent of Africa having darker skin to be able to resist the harsh sun, to plants growing towards the sun, or being able to close their leaves during peak high temperatures. Adaptations enhance the reproductive potential of the individuals exhibiting them, including their ability to survive, to reproduce. Adaptations are not constant. As an environment changes, natural selection causes the characteristics of the individuals in a population to track those changes. Organisms grow and develop as a result of genes providing specific instructions that will direct cellular growth and development. This ensures that the newly born of a species will grow up to exhibit many of the same characteristics as its parents. For example, a newborn human baby has the genes to develop into a full adult human with shared characteristics from both parents. Even the smallest organisms are complex and require multiple regulatory mechanisms to coordinate internal functions, respond to stimuli, and cope with environmental stresses. Homeostasis refers to the relatively stable internal environment required to maintain life. Two examples of internal functions regulated in an organism are nutrient transport and blood flow. Organs perform specific functions, such as carrying oxygen throughout the body, removing wastes, delivering nutrients to every cell, and cooling the body. In order to function properly, cells require appropriate conditions such as proper temperature, pH levels, and appropriate concentration of diverse chemicals. These conditions may, however, change from one moment to the next. Organisms can maintain homeostatic internal conditions within a narrow range almost constantly, despite environmental changes, by activation of regulatory mechanisms. For example, an organism needs to regulate body temperature through what is called the thermoregulation process. Organisms that live in cold climates, such as polar bears and penguins, have body structures that help them withstand low temperatures and conserve body heat. Structures that aid in this type of insulation include fur, feathers, blubber, and fat. In hot climates, organisms have methods, such as perspiration in humans, that help them to shed excess body heat. All organisms use a source of energy for their metabolic activities. Some organisms capture energy from the sun and convert it into chemical energy in food. Others use chemical energy in molecules they take in as food. For example, plants use an energy processing system called photosynthesis. Photosynthesis converts carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and glucose. Glucose is used to feed the plant, and oxygen is a byproduct. The reason for the diversity of life on Earth is because of a long history of mutations, or random changes in hereditary material over time. These mutations allow the possibility for organisms to adapt to a constantly changing environment. An organism that evolves will develop characteristics to make itself adapt to the environment. This will ensure that the organism will have greater reproductive success, subject to the forces of natural selection. As was previously stated, living things are highly organized and structured, following a hierarchy that we can examine on a scale from smallest to largest. The atom is the smallest and most fundamental unit of matter that retains the properties of an element. They are also called the building blocks of life. It consists of a nucleus surrounded by electrons. Atoms form molecules. A molecule is a chemical structure consisting of at least two atoms held together by one or more chemical bonds. Many molecules that are biologically important are macromolecules, large molecules that are typically formed by polymerization. A polymer is a large molecule that is made by combining smaller units called monomers, which are simpler than macromolecules. An example of a macromolecule is deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA, which contains the instructions for the structure and functioning of all living organisms. Some cells contain aggregates of macromolecules surrounded by membranes. We call these organelles. Organelles are small structures that exist within cells. Examples of organelles include mitochondria and chloroplasts, which carry out crucial functions. Mitochondria produce energy to power the cell, while chloroplasts enable green plants to utilize the energy in sunlight to make sugars. All living things are made of cells. The cell itself is the smallest fundamental unit of structure and function in living organisms. Some organisms consist of a single cell, and others are multicellular. Scientists classify cells as prokaryotic or eukaryotic. Prokaryotes are single-celled that do not have membrane-bound nuclei. In contrast, the cells of eukaryotes do have membrane-bound organelles and a membrane-bound nucleus. In larger organisms, cells combine to make tissues, which are groups of similar cells carrying out similar or related functions. Organs are collections of tissues grouped together performing a common function. Organs are present not only in animals, but also in plants. An organ system is a higher level of organization that consists of functionally related organs. Mammals have many organ systems. For instance, the circulatory system transports blood through the body and to and from the lungs. It includes organs such as the heart and blood vessels. Organisms are individual living entities. For example, each tree in a forest is an organism. Single-celled prokaryotes and single-celled eukaryotes are also organisms, which biologists typically call microorganisms. Biologists collectively call all the individuals of a species living within a specific area a population. For example, an island may include many coconut trees, which represent the population of coconut trees on that island. Different populations may live in the same specific area. For example, a forest with pine trees includes populations of flowering plants, insects, and microbial populations. A community is the sum of populations inhabiting a particular area. For instance, all the trees, flowers, insects, and other populations in a forest form the forest's community. The forest itself is an ecosystem. An ecosystem consists of all the living things in a particular area, together with the abiotic, non-living parts of that environment such as nitrogen in the soil or rainwater. At the highest level of organization, the biosphere is the collection of all ecosystems, and it represents the zones of life on Earth. It includes land, water, and even the atmosphere to a certain extent. To conclude this lesson, let's state the fact that biology, as a science, has such a broad scope that has to do with the tremendous diversity of life on Earth. The source of this diversity is evolution, the process of gradual change in a population or species over time. Evolutionary biologists study the evolution of living things in everything from the microscopic world to ecosystems. The scope of biology contains many branches and subdisciplines. Biologists may pursue one of those subdisciplines and work in a more focused field. With that said, let's move on to the next lesson.